Imagine a state where the rest of the world simply melts away. You are completely immersed in the task at hand. The internal critic is silent, and effort flows effortlessly into action. This is the flow state, often described as being in the zone. It is the peak human experience, a psychological sweet spot where performance accelerates and satisfaction deepens. This is not a myth reserved for elite athletes or virtuoso musicians. It is a universal phenomenon. It is a biological imperative wired into our very brains. Flow is the hidden engine of human achievement. We see it in the surgeon performing a delicate operation, hours passing in what feels like moments. We observe it in the coder who solves an impossible problem at 3 a.m. We find it in the artist who loses themselves entirely to the canvas. The desire to achieve this state is what drives the highest levels of human endeavor across all domains. This book is an investigation into the mechanics of that state. It is a deep dive into the science, the philosophy, and the practical methods required to access this profound neurological landscape consistently. Our journey begins with the essential question: what exactly is flow, and why does it hold such transformative power over our lives? Why does time distort, and why does our sense of self disappear? The hook lies in the promise of unlocking untapped potential. The promise is that peak performance is not about pushing harder, it is about learning how to flow. We must move beyond the anecdotal evidence and examine the neurobiology. We must look at the exact chemical cocktail the brain releases when we enter this optimal condition. This introductory section sets the stage for a compelling inquiry. It frames flow not just as a desirable feeling but as a core subject of human performance study. It is the key to mastering any skill, from the mundane to the magnificent. The investigation into this seamless union of action and awareness starts now. We are peering behind the veil of consciousness to reveal the infrastructure of genius. The foundation of our inquiry rests on the pioneering work of one man, Dr. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. He is the architect of flow theory. His extensive research across diverse cultures and professions formalized the concept, giving it structure and a vocabulary. He noticed a common thread among people who found genuine satisfaction in their work. They described a similar, almost spiritual, experience of deep absorption. This was the moment the term flow was born. He didn't invent the experience, but he gave us the framework to understand it. The stage we are setting is a psychological landscape defined by clear parameters. Flow is achieved when a specific balance is struck. This balance exists between the perceived challenge of a task and the individual's perceived skill level. If the challenge significantly outweighs the skill, the result is anxiety and frustration. If the skill significantly outweighs the challenge, the result is boredom and apathy. Flow exists in that narrow, exhilarating channel directly in the middle. Our key subjects are the living, breathing examples of this theory in action. We will follow a professional big-wave surfer who calculates complex hydrodynamics and risk assessment in milliseconds. His life depends on being in flow. We will also examine a Silicon Valley executive who structures his workday specifically to maximize periods of deep, focused work. These subjects represent two ends of the spectrum, high physical risk and high cognitive demand. Yet, their descriptions of the flow state are virtually identical. The universality of this experience is one of its most fascinating aspects. It transcends culture, age, and professional field. We must also introduce the neurochemical components of the state. Flow is a cocktail of neurotransmitters: dopamine for motivation, norepinephrine for attention, and anandamide for an overall sense of well-being. Understanding these elements is crucial. They are the physiological levers we can learn to pull. The stage is now set for a forensic examination of the preconditions and triggers of this performance enhancer. The core mystery of flow is its elusive nature. Everyone has experienced it, from a child intensely playing with a toy to an adult engrossed in a complex project. Yet, it cannot be summoned on demand. It remains a serendipitous event for most, a fleeting moment rather than a reliable tool. This is the initial problem we must solve. If flow is the pinnacle of human performance, why is the access point guarded by chance? Why can a person be in the zone one day and struggle with the same task the next? The problem is consistency. We need a reliable methodology for invitation, not just a hope for accidental entry. The conventional understanding of focus involves effort and conscious willpower. But flow is effortless action. It is a paradox of concentration. The harder you try to focus, the further flow seems to retreat. This contradiction leads to the deeper mystery. Flow involves a temporary deactivation of the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for high-level reasoning and self-monitoring. This process is called transient hypofrontality. It is an intentional, self-induced temporary shutdown of our conscious control. This raises serious questions about the nature of free will and control. Are we at our best when we are least consciously controlling the outcome? This idea challenges centuries of psychological thought. Furthermore, the initial problem includes the difficulty of measuring flow accurately. It is a subjective experience. How do you quantify an internal state of optimal focus? Early research relied on self-reporting, which is inherently flawed. The mystery requires a deeper, more empirical approach using modern neuroscience. We must find the physical signature of flow in the brain. Only then can we move from philosophical discussion to practical engineering of the experience. The quest is to turn the magical, unpredictable zone into a predictable, reproducible state of mind. This shift from art to science is the initial and greatest hurdle of our investigation. The first major clue emerged not from psychology labs, but from the study of biofeedback and athletic performance. The crucial discovery involved the brain's electrical activity. Specifically, a shift in the dominant brain wave frequency that occurs just before and during the flow state. Researchers observed that as subjects transitioned into deep focus, their brain waves shifted from the high-frequency beta waves, associated with active, conscious thinking, to the slower, more rhythmic alpha and theta waves. Alpha waves are linked to relaxed, yet alert states. Theta waves are characteristic of deep meditation or the phase just before sleep. This was a profound realization. It suggested that flow is fundamentally a state of deep mental relaxation, not heightened tension. The brain is literally slowing down its internal chatter. The noise of self-doubt, planning, and overthinking is being filtered out. This filtering mechanism is the key. The physical brain is entering an ultra-efficient processing mode. It conserves energy by temporarily shutting down unnecessary cortical regions. This hyper-efficiency allows the remaining resources to be dedicated entirely to the task at hand. It explains the sensation of effortless action, as the brain is using the least amount of effort for the maximum output. Another crucial discovery came from analyzing the chemical footprint. The burst of anandamide, one of the brain's natural bliss molecules, was a key finding. Anandamide is known to dampen pain and increase lateral thinking. It is this chemical that creates the profound sense of well-being and the loss of self-consciousness inherent in flow. This chemical surge acts as a powerful reward mechanism, ensuring the individual will seek out the conditions for flow again. It is the biological incentive for peak performance. This evidence of electrical and chemical signatures transformed flow from a psychological concept into a quantifiable neurological event. This discovery provided the first, undeniable proof that the flow state is a measurable and therefore manageable phenomenon. The study of flow, while robust, is not without its conflicting theories. The main contention revolves around whether flow is a cause of peak performance or merely an effect. The traditional view holds that flow is the state that leads to peak performance. You enter flow, and therefore, you excel. However, a counter-theory suggests that highly practiced, automatic, and excellent performance triggers the flow state as a feedback mechanism. In this view, you must already be at an expert level for the feeling to properly materialize. This creates a psychological, chicken or the egg dilemma, impacting how training should be structured. Another escalating stake involves the debate over the optimal challenge-to-skill ratio. Csikszentmihalyi's original work focused on the balanced, sweet spot. But modern researchers, particularly those studying extreme sports and military applications, suggest that pushing the challenge slightly past the current skill level, a form of productive overload, is a faster catalyst for flow. This high-stakes theory posits that a small degree of anxiety is necessary to fully commit the brain's resources, thus maximizing the hypofrontality effect. This is the difference between a comfortable zone and a true growth edge. Pushing this edge carries an inherent risk of tipping into panic, making the stakes much higher. The most significant conflict lies in the realm of addiction. The intense, rewarding neurochemical cocktail of flow, dopamine, anandamide, can create a psychological dependence. Extreme athletes, driven by the intense pleasure of flow, often engage in increasingly dangerous activities. This pursuit of the state, rather than the activity itself, becomes the goal. The stakes escalate when flow becomes an escape rather than an enhancement. It can mask burnout and lead to an unsustainable lifestyle, prioritizing the fix of the state over long-term well-being. Our investigation must address this dark side of flow. The conflicting theories and escalating risks underscore the necessity of a rigorous, ethical approach to accessing peak performance. For the individual seeking peak performance, the point of no return is the moment they commit to structuring their life around the flow state's principles. It is the conscious decision to replace busy work with deep work. This commitment signifies an irreversible change in one's personal and professional identity. The point of no return is reached when an individual accepts the necessity of the 8 triggers of flow. These triggers are the 8 conditions that must be present to consistently induce the state. They include having a clear goal, receiving immediate feedback, and the paradox of control. The most crucial trigger is the deep sense of concentration. Once an individual starts consistently identifying and engineering these 8 conditions, their performance becomes so disproportionately elevated that there is no psychological or professional pathway back to their former way of working. The old habits of multitasking and shallow attention become impossible to tolerate. In a neurological sense, the point of no return relates to structural changes in the brain. Consistent flow practice, particularly the state of transient hypofrontality, leads to an efficient rewiring. The brain becomes better at suppressing the prefrontal cortex on demand. It learns the shortcut to optimal function. This is the creation of a flow circuit in the brain. Once established, the brain is fundamentally changed. The default mode network, responsible for mind-wandering and self-referential thought, becomes less dominant. The brain's natural inclination shifts from rumination to active engagement. Professionally, this is the moment an executive realizes their output has doubled with less effort. This is when an athlete breaks through a career-defining performance plateau. The efficiency gained makes the old, effortful struggle obsolete. The individual commits to the high-demand, high-reward life of the flow seeker. This commitment to intentional engagement is the true point of no return. The halfway revelation, the central twist in our understanding of flow, is the realization that the state is not purely about doing, it is profoundly about undoing. We have been taught that success requires effort, grit, and conscious control. The twist is that peak performance requires the temporary suspension of all three. The brain, in its flow state, is performing a kind of cognitive rebellion. It is overriding the conscious, critical, and planning self. The midpoint twist is that the most direct route to maximum control is through surrender. This idea is counterintuitive and challenges the very foundations of Western achievement culture. Furthermore, the revelation involves the surprising accessibility of flow. It is not about reaching an expert level in a complex, high-risk activity like base jumping. The twist is that flow can be found in the mundane. Washing dishes, folding laundry, or walking a familiar path can become a flow experience if the conditions are met. The activity itself is secondary to the quality of attention applied to it. This democratization of flow is a powerful midpoint revelation. It transforms the concept from an exclusive tool of the elite to an accessible daily practice for everyone. This insight shifts the focus from professional excellence to the quality of daily living. Another significant twist is the role of boredom. We often view boredom as a negative state to be avoided. However, the revelation is that structured boredom is a prerequisite for flow. By intentionally removing external stimulation and forcing the brain to sit in the quiet, we prime the cognitive system for intense engagement later. This allows the brain to consolidate information and search for a challenge. Boredom, in this context, is the necessary space between efforts, the vacuum that flow rushes in to fill. The entire investigation pivots on this newfound understanding. Flow is not a magic pill, it is the natural consequence of well-structured challenge and the disciplined ability to let go. The newest evidence emerging from fMRI studies is revealing the precise neural pathways activated during flow. A significant finding is the increased synchronization between disparate brain regions. In flow, the brain acts less like a collection of specialized compartments and more like a single, unified processor. Specific evidence shows enhanced connectivity between the motor cortex and the visual and auditory processing centers. This is the physiological basis for the seamless, instantaneous connection between thought and action that defines the state. The reaction time effectively drops to zero. The thought is the action. The psychological impact of consistent flow practice is profound and far-reaching. Beyond temporary performance enhancement, it fundamentally alters an individual's sense of self and well-being. The disappearance of the self, or ego death, during flow has a lasting positive effect. By stepping outside of self-critical internal dialogue, individuals gain a perspective shift. They realize that their critical inner voice is not essential for performance. This leads to reduced rumination, higher self-esteem, and a greater sense of psychological safety outside of the state as well. The internal pressure to be perfect diminishes. New evidence also points to flow as a potent treatment for trauma and depression. Because flow demands 100% of the attention, it acts as a temporary, non-chemical anesthetic for negative thought patterns. It forces the mind into the present. For individuals struggling with intrusive thoughts, flow provides a vital, necessary respite. It is a form of deep engagement that is incompatible with anxiety. The therapeutic use of flow is a crucial area of emerging study. The overall psychological impact is one of increased intrinsic motivation. Individuals who regularly access flow begin to engage in activities for the sheer joy of the act, not for external rewards. This shift defines a more resilient and fulfilled personality. In an era driven by metrics, productivity tools, and the constant demand for instant gratification, there have been subtle and overt attempts to suppress the truths about flow. The first suppression comes from the cult of distraction. Modern technology, designed for constant interruption and shallow engagement, is fundamentally anti-flow. The business model of social media and constant notifications is based on fragmenting attention. This deliberate splintering of focus is the antithesis of the deep concentration required for flow. The truth is suppressed by a pervasive digital environment that makes the necessary prerequisite of quiet focus seem impractical or old-fashioned. A second suppression comes from corporate culture, which often mistakes busyness for productivity. The expectation of being constantly available, replying to emails instantly, and attending back-to-back meetings prevents the extended, uninterrupted blocks of time necessary to enter flow. The truth, that less, deeply focused work is vastly more productive than more, fragmented work, is often resisted by management structures that prioritize oversight and presence over actual output. The system is designed for surveillance, not sovereignty over one's own attention. Furthermore, there is an attempt to co-opt and commodify the flow state itself. Various companies now market apps and supplements promising instant flow. This oversimplification suppresses the truth that flow is a skill that requires discipline and structuring of the environment, not a product to be consumed. These attempts to bypass the effortful nature of the flow trigger are a form of intellectual dishonesty. They undermine the psychological reward that comes from achieving the state through intentional practice. The resistance to flow is a resistance to deep, meaningful engagement in favor of superficial, easily quantifiable activity. Our mission is to expose these suppressive forces and champion the lost art of true focus. The pursuit of flow is an active confrontation with internal and external resistance. Internally, the primary confrontation is with the inner critic. This voice, housed in the prefrontal cortex, monitors performance, judges mistakes, and generates self-doubt. It is the gatekeeper of flow, and it must be temporarily silenced. The pursuit involves developing the skill of self-talk management. This is not about positive affirmations, but about learning to recognize the onset of judgmental thoughts and gently rerouting attention back to the immediate task. This is the moment of confrontation where the will to engage clashes with the habit of self-criticism. Externally, the pursuit confronts the tyranny of the environment. This includes the constant battle against open-plan offices, notification bombardment, and the social pressure to be responsive. The confrontation requires setting firm boundaries, blocking out time, physically isolating the workspace, and communicating a need for deep focus to colleagues and family. This is a refusal to participate in the culture of perpetual interruption. It is an assertive declaration of the individual's right to concentrated work. This confrontation, though sometimes awkward, is non-negotiable for consistent flow access. The external world will always demand shallow engagement, the individual must fight for depth. The confrontation also involves the willingness to embrace productive failure. Flow is found at the edge of one's ability. This means mistakes are inevitable. Many people instinctively pull back when a task becomes difficult or a mistake is made, thereby breaking the flow state. The pursuit requires the resilience to confront failure not as a signal to quit, but as the immediate feedback loop necessary to adjust and re-engage. It is the ability to maintain calm and focus in the moment of maximum challenge. This confrontation with fear and self-doubt is the final hurdle to entering the zone at will. As the investigation draws to a close, the final pieces of the flow puzzle assemble into a comprehensive model. We see that consistent flow is not a single technique but a holistic lifestyle built on 4 pillars: preparation, trigger, maintenance, and recovery. Each pillar is essential for a complete cycle. Preparation involves managing the internal landscape. This includes sleep hygiene, nutrition, and establishing a daily ritual that signals to the brain that deep work is imminent. The body must be ready, and the mind must be calmed. This is the often overlooked setup phase. The trigger phase is the intentional engineering of the environment and task, ensuring the optimal challenge-to-skill ratio is present. It involves eliminating distraction and establishing clear, micro-goals that provide immediate feedback. This is the entry point, the moment of commitment. Maintenance is the ability to sustain the state once entered, which is achieved through continuous attention management and the dynamic balancing of the challenge. As skill improves, the challenge must be gently increased to keep the system engaged and prevent boredom. This requires constant, subtle self-regulation. Recovery is the crucial final piece. Flow is metabolically taxing, requiring a vast amount of neurological resources. The burst of neurotransmitters eventually wears off. Proper recovery, meditation, light exercise, or simply resting the mind, is necessary to replenish the system. This prevents the burnout and addiction described earlier. When these 4 pieces fall into place, flow moves from a random event to a predictable cycle. The focus shifts from the event of flow to the system that produces it. The final, elegant piece of the puzzle is the realization that flow is a virtuous circle. The more you flow, the more efficient your brain becomes at accessing it, making the next entry point easier. The primary conclusion of our investigation is that the flow state is the ultimate human technology for self-actualization and performance. The truth revealed is simple yet revolutionary. Peak performance is a state of psychological and neurological efficiency that must be earned through preparation and structured challenge, not forced through willpower. Flow is the result of aligning the conscious desire for achievement with the brain's deepest-seated evolutionary programming. It is the mechanism by which the mind achieves its maximum possible output with a minimum perceived effort. The brain is not working harder in flow, it is working smarter, by eliminating the wasteful function of the self-monitoring system. The true key to accessing peak performance lies in two fundamental shifts. First, moving the locus of control from the conscious mind to the autonomic, deeply focused mind, and second, consistently seeking the Goldilocks zone of challenge. This zone is the true laboratory of growth. The flow state is the objective proof that anxiety and boredom are simply signals of misalignment. Anxiety means the challenge exceeds the skill, boredom means the skill exceeds the challenge. By interpreting these states not as personal failings but as informational feedback, the individual gains a reliable navigation system. The truth is that the goal is not the accomplishment itself, but the quality of the journey. A life lived seeking flow is a life of deep, intrinsic reward. The resulting performance is merely a beneficial side effect. The revealed truth liberates the individual from the endless cycle of external validation and grounds their purpose in the joy of engagement itself. Flow is, therefore, not just a performance hack, it is a blueprint for a life well lived. The aftermath of this profound understanding is a global shift in how institutions approach productivity and education. The legacy of flow theory is now being applied far beyond the initial academic circles, finding modern ties and fields from military training to public school systems. In the military, flow protocols are being integrated into high-stress decision-making scenarios. By training soldiers to recognize and manage the triggers, their performance under fire, where reaction time is paramount, can be reliably optimized. The goal is to induce the hyper-efficient, moment-by-moment focus of flow in situations of extreme duress. In modern education, the concept of the challenge-to-skill ratio is revolutionizing personalized learning. Teachers are learning to customize assignments to keep students perpetually on their growth edge, preventing the twin pitfalls of boredom and frustration that often lead to disengagement. This has led to higher retention and deeper, more intrinsic learning. The most significant modern ties are found in the tech industry, where the concept of maker time versus manager time is a direct application of flow principles. Companies are institutionalizing long blocks of uninterrupted, flow-conducive work time. This acknowledges the superior output of a focused mind over an interrupted one. The legacy of flow is now shifting the focus of psychological study from pathology to potential. It provides a positive framework for mental health, focusing on what makes life worth living and what generates optimal experience. Flow is becoming recognized not just as a state of peak performance, but as a key indicator of psychological resilience and mental fortitude. The aftermath is a world slowly waking up to the power of deliberate, deep attention. Our investigation has confirmed that the flow state is a quantifiable, predictable, and learnable condition of optimal human function. We have traced its evolutionary origins, mapped its neurological signatures, from alpha and theta waves to the anandamide burst, and detailed the practical, four-pillared system for its reliable access. The journey to peak performance is ultimately a journey of attention management and environmental engineering. The core conclusion is cemented: to access your peak performance, you must embrace the paradox of surrender. You must willingly mute your self-monitoring mind and commit fully to a challenge that perfectly stretches your current skill. Success is not found in the struggle against distraction, but in the creation of an environment where distraction is neurologically impossible. This is the simple, powerful summary of the flow state. Yet, a lingering mystery remains. Despite our detailed understanding of its mechanics, the subjective experience of flow remains deeply spiritual and profoundly personal. Why does the temporary disappearance of the self feel so overwhelmingly satisfying? Why does the cessation of the ego, the very thing that defines our waking identity, feel like the most authentic state of being? Is flow merely a survival mechanism, or is it a window into a deeper, latent potential of consciousness? Does the flow state represent a glimpse of what the human mind is truly capable of when it operates without the limitations of its own conscious construction? This is the final, compelling mystery that our journey leaves unresolved. The pursuit of flow continues not just for peak performance, but for the elusive answer to the ultimate question: what is the true, unburdened capacity of the human spirit? The zone is open. The investigation is complete. The practice now begins.